This is the Horse-Human Connection, a captivating podcast where we extend into the world of equine-assisted learning, horse training, and gentleness in working with these magnificent creatures. Captivating stories from the leading professionals and ordinary people alike unravel novel ideas in being with horses. The Horse-Human Connection is an idea, a place, and a voice. The idea is to support the quiet revolution and recognize the intelligence and true nature of the horse. The place is a destination farm near the Umpqua Forest and River that slows down visitors and patrons enough to experience the shift. The voice is this podcast. Welcome to today's episode.
Hi, I'm Ishi with the Horse-Human Connection Matrix podcast. Today I have with me Sarah, who I have been wanting to interview about something that happened in her life. And this isn't really related to horses, it's just related to life. And Sarah and I have known each other for a good long time. And about 3 years ago, she informed me that she'd been diagnosed with cancer. And this was following me not hearing from her very much. I just think she is one of the bravest people that I know and has one of the strongest minds in her ability to create her world with her thinking. I'm going to jump in and ask her some questions about this so that she has the opportunity to elaborate some of the things that she's told me, and I'm sure I'll hear some new stuff today too. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Ishi. It's always a treat to be together.
It is. So I want to go all the way back to when we first met. And one of the things that you had been doing was living in Peru 6 months out of the year. And I remember you telling me the story of closing your eyes and pointing to a place on the map of Peru of where you would go. And I remember asking you why you wanted to inundate yourself into a community so far away and like a third world country. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember your answer going something like this. I was a nurse. This is you talking. I was a nurse and I've seen what Western medicine can do. And I never want to be in a position where I'm stuck in a hospital and forced to have that kind of treatment. And your plan was actually, if you were going to grow old, to grow old in a community in Peru where you knew that would not happen. That's what I remember. Is that pretty accurate?
It's accurate in a number of ways. First of all, I went there definitely with the intention of search for something that was wisdom that came out of nature and the natural world, and to meet people and places where that kind of exchange was still vibrant and alive, and hopefully be able to move closer to that kind of knowledge than I could find anywhere in this country.
So your intention was much broader than the explanation that I kind of ingested.
That's the broadest understanding of my intention. My other intention related to the fact that, as we've talked about many times, my involvement with shamanic ideas and education for myself and the pursuit of that in the States. In fact, what identified Peru as where I wanted to go was I went to hear some music that was in concert in Portland, Oregon, from a man who was raising funds for people in Peru, for children in the highlands, for schools. And I had a kind of vision experience that was intentionally built into the concert for people to journey through. to be a platform for journeying.
So these were all things that attracted you to Peru.
Yes.
And so let's fast forward 10 years. It's about 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
you know that there is a mass in your breast,
Yes.
and you don't tell anybody, and you don't go to the doctor.
Correct.
What was going through your head? And it's not me admonishing you, but that's me like imagining what listeners might say.
Well, what was going through my head, especially with my background as a nurse, that's when everything you said in the introduction comes in. And plus my time in Peru of getting a foothold or some sense of connection with the power of plant medicine.
Okay.
Because as it turns out, over the last few years, I've made use of a great deal of plant medicine with a full trust in it, and not a trust to cure necessarily, but
To support life?
to support life. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And to support my own calibration to dealing with the kind of issues that have come up in the trajectory that I've chosen, which is not to have interventions occur through modern medicine.
Okay. And do you know anything? I mean, you purposely didn't research a lot of stuff. You purposely didn't look at a lot of things, but you did choose one course of another thing to do, working with a shaman from Hawaii. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about what regime that was and what the results have been?
The woman that she just mentioned also had training in modern medicine and pharmacology and practices for healing from that direction, as well as her own unconventional trainings. So when I first met her, she did what I would call a healer's version of an MRI scan and interviewed me with specific questions that she wanted to know about who I was, how I worked, how I processed things, and how I communicated. Very specific questions. Some of them, kind of threw me like what's your relationship with your father, with your mother, with your children? Where and through my answers, she could feel and have some knowledge of what the hotspots were, where I wasn't being honest. And I remember her interrupting me at some point because I can speak clearly,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't really getting to the bottom of it. And she said, "Come on, start talking without bullshit."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. She knew how to get you out of the story and to the heart of the matter.
Yes. And then the second part of the interview was pretty amazing and transformative. I was astounded. She asked me to repeat after her specific identified hotspots that she had flagged and felt were impeding the health of my spiritual system.
And when she had you repeat after her, was it in a positive affirmation, or was it simply a reflection of what you had said, or condensing or synopsis of it?
It was actually, she was coaching me, telling me what to say to individual people that she had asked me about, that were people that were created, that I had blockages with, and since they were a part of my life.
So she was clearing.
She was clearing.
She was clearing misunderstandings, if you will, with people from your life that had created blockages by having you imagine that you were speaking to these people.
Correct. And through speaking to them, I not only released my entrenched kind of negative, my entrenched attitudes that were negative and that I was suffering knowing that I had these feelings in me, so that by her coaching me on what to say about those was a tremendous help to purging them. Because of the second half of the interview was not only speaking to those people, coached, cued by the healer, but an incredible transforming process of then being coached with words that had to do with concepts like forgiveness, well-wishing, compassion, understanding of how that individual, for example, was who they were.
So I'm going to just take a stab at something here, okay? You also have a background in psychology.
Yeah.
And I've done my share of therapy. I'm still doing some therapy. And so one way I'm making sense of what you say and likening it to what might happen in a therapist's office is you're examining these patterns, you're examining these possible conflicts and blockages affect you and your psyche and your ability to be happy and have joy. But the difference is, instead of somebody leading you through on your own time and waiting for you to be present, be willing, make the connections, she has the ability to be like a psychic empath and cut right to the heart of the matter, feed you the words, have you repeat after her, put them out into the universe, clear the beliefs, clear the energy and the blockages, and basically take a huge shortcut.
That's a good summation, because it was extraordinarily powerful. And in the second half of the interview with her, where she was feeding me this, I almost saw it visually, that after the purging and the no bullshit, messages that she asked me to speak out loud to those people.
Was there an emotional purging on your part? Was this an emotional thing for you?
Not at that point, but when she switched to the affirmative side.
Okay. The forgiveness and the heart, opening heart and all of that.
Opening heart and all of that. I felt and saw this bridge in construction that the more steps I took on it, just shed and transformed the entire, all the things that were being said. And I mean, imagine someone, full of mud and junk stuck to them and darkness and in their clothing, getting on a bridge and shedding that clothing. And by the time they got to the other side of the bridge, they were free of it.
Right, naked and shiny.
Yes. Twinkly clean. And it was at that point that it was in the transition of walking across that bridge, going across that bridge, that a lot of the emotions came out, and I just wept.
Sounds very cathartic.
It was, yeah.
Wow. So then what happened physically? The grapes. You were eating grapes. You were eating nothing but grapes. And I'm like, how can she be doing that? They're so sweet.
Well, a month later, this person was in the States and came to stay at my home for a week. And that's when she said, okay, it's time for a fast. Are you game? And I, of course, said, sure, I'm game. And that's when she put me on the fasting diet for at least 2 weeks was the goal.
What was the time frame between you doing this interview and you starting the fast?
About a month.
Okay.
About a month.
So about a month to process.
Yeah.
Okay.
And during that month, we would have calls and sessions and check-ins.
Okay.
And I can't remember clearly in time if
But during this period, you're also preparing to die. I remember talking to you at one point, and you said, I'm not sick. I don't want to be treated like I'm sick. I'm dying.
actually, I lifted that from a handwritten note in the first page of a book that I had read, because I spent those two, good year and a half of absolute silence without talking to anybody, reading.
So that was your searching period. And like what amazed me so much.
And that was the phrase that was inside one of the used books that I bought.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that
And
was...
I felt like a gift had landed in my lap from the previous reader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So I don't remember experiencing you in any kind of self-pity about any of this. Did you avoid that or just not? And if so, how? Or did you just not talk about it?
Can you give me some lead lines for what self-pity would sound like?
Why did this happen to me? I had things I was still going to do. Just like, poor me, people are not going to care. People are not going to be able to take care of me. Just kind of a desperate, negative cycle that I imagine a lot of people with a diagnosis or even the idea of a diagnosis could spiral down easily.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I did not experience most of those words that you said. I didn't rant and rail, if there's a God, why would I, that
Right.
kind of
You
stuff.
didn't do that.
I didn't do that.
There was just kind of an immediate acceptance.
I felt the ways that it shocked me, because of course shock is involved in a cycle of grief and loss, and I'm familiar with that from medicine wheel studies. And so that was like a template to me that was in my being and mindfulness from the start to okay, don't get, evaluating if I was getting stuck. But mostly I saw it as a golden opportunity to prepare for something that obviously that came to me, and I wasn't going to fight in a conventional sense, as in do battle with. What happened with the feelings I had wrestled with in the first bit there, at least a year, a little more, were all things that I think what happened is I made actionable use of. For example, what you said in your lead-in was, if I felt, oh my God, what's, visions of who's going to take care of me, how are they going to know what to do, I put my affairs in order so that, so I did what I could to take care of the future, not with this utter conviction, I wasn't driven by, I'm going to die, as something, as a concept, or a hovering menace in my day, more as, my tidy self making
You
sure.
just organized.
Yeah, I just organized.
It's time to get organized.
So, and then I just dove in those quiet days to kind of trying to get a read on my own emotional fears and areas that you would expect anyone to go through, and make a decision about how I wanted to move forward.
Right. So you were already living. You were already, like when I met you, you were a very alive person. You're a very alive person today. And I think sometimes when people get a terminal diagnosis or have a near-death experience, it's like a wake-up call of, wow, I'm not living, I'm not embracing everything that I want to do. And my sense of who you are as I've known you is that didn't happen because you've already been doing that. I mean, anybody that takes a map and closes their eyes and points their finger and then goes and lives there, and there's an amazing story, but we don't have time to go into that today, but there's an amazing story of all the things that happened to you in Peru, for being gifted a piece of property, becoming part of a community and walking to do, farming with the rest of the community every day. And I mean, there's a whole life there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a life. Every moment there is life in you. And so I guess I'm asking, you didn't have that cliche experience of finding out you're going to die. I mean, we're all going to die. We all know we're all going to die.
Right.
So can you talk about that a little bit? Like how...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can. If anything, getting the diagnosis amplified my daily practice of all the things that got me to be the person you just described. I felt like I was in a PhD course on mindfulness, and, it was a real gift in that way.
So there was the same kind of gift that a lot of people experience, is just on a different floor. If an elevator goes up and down floors, it was a different floor than what a lot of people experience, since you were kind of already in a very alive state.
Yeah, and I didn't scramble on my bucket list because I didn't really have one.
Uh-huh. Right.
And I didn't get frantic and say, "Oh, I've always wanted to," Well, it's the old shopping spree fix.
Right. There was more of like, there was more of like what I witnessed was more like of a deepening of the relationships you have, whether that's a relationship with your spiritual rituals or a relationship with mindfulness, a relationship with your children.
Totally.
Like it was just a deepening of life.
And you know what, right from the get-go on this thread is the radiologist talked to me, and a big looming man, like a judge on a high platform, rolled right into my face. Mm-hmm. And there I am beneath him in a gown, a hospital gown, mm-hmm. gown that we all love and wish we had more of. And he had out his clipboard and he said, "Okay, now I'm going to get you all scheduled for this and this and this and this." And it took like 2 to 3 attempts to stop that thing that he wanted to rev up.
He could not imagine that you had a choice and that you might be choosing none of those.
Correct. And understandably, from how he was trained and how he's experienced.
And what he happens to do every day.
So in my mind, I probably wasn't rude, but in my mind, his behavior pushed me to the point where I straightened up in my gown and I said, "Look, I'm 73, 71 back then." And I said, "I live the life that's more fulfilling than I ever dreamed of. I am totally content and grateful and happy. I'm retired. I don't feel like I have more left to do in my life other than just be where I am."
Yeah.
And I said, "This doesn't make sense to me. Does it to you?" And that stopped him. And I remember kind of a background awareness of the young women techs in the room who were there during this, and they just went totally still, kind of like ducks when they're scared and they think if we hold still enough, they won't see me.
Because there might be some stuff they were doing that didn't make any sense too.
And I walked out of there, and I knew to anticipate, just from my who I am. Okay, the shock's gonna, the bomb went off. When am I gonna start feeling the shock waves?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I moved from that point. I knew what I could anticipate the kind of side-swiping waves that anyone is going to go through. So I went and got a fish sandwich at the drive-through fish shack and went and parked on the curb to eat it. And that's when the first wave really hit. And I just sat there with it. Like the axis of my earth just flipped.
Yeah.
So there was a feeling of disorientation in space and time. I don't remember, bawling my eyes out or grabbing a hold of the steering wheel to steady myself. But I remember, it's like being in the sea and you see the big one coming towards you and you decide just to stand there and let it wash over you without being sucked out into the deep.
Right. So let me just recap this. This was the first time that you had told another person about the Mass.
This was the result of having finally gone into my doctor and told him that I had discovered a Mass and asked him what the least invasive way to confirm a diagnosis would be, because I wasn't willing to do anything invasive. And he said, not even a biopsy? And I said, no. So I had that as a starting point. No matter how strong your beliefs or intentions are with especially physical things, what you'll do if it happens to you.
So the first wave that you're talking about is a wave of this is real.
This is real. I've spent a year and a half thinking about it and reading. I know what I want to do. So it was really more a strategic conversation, and it was the first one. No, it wasn't the first one, but it was the second one.
Were there more waves that came?
After that, parked in the car with my fish sandwich? Yes, but they weren't disorienting to me like that one. That was, a real tsunami. But it passed. By the time I drove home,
It passed. The emotions went through you.
it passed. And actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I think it's after that point that I had a neighbor who was a very dear friend and really a wild card. She was way too creative and passionate and unhinged for me, but it was delightful to have, the road between, to know her and know that I also had a road between our houses, and, because it was intense. But I can't remember in order when I talked with her about it, but I told her I had discovered a small lump in my breast, and she decided that we should call it my pearl.
Your pearl. I like that.
And so for a long time, that's what I called it.
Your pearl.
And then, there was a long gap where I did have to go through a fear and, other emotions that were challenging to make my way through. But I did it privately for the most part, and I would talk about it with various people after that point.
It's been 2 years since that appointment.
Oh, it's been longer. That appointment was...
This is the Horse-Human Connection, a captivating podcast where we extend into the world of equine assisted learning, horse training, and gentleness in working with these magnificent creatures. Captivating stories from the leading professionals and ordinary people alike unravel novel ideas in being with horses. The Horse-Human Connection is an idea, a place, and a voice. The idea is to support the quiet revolution and recognize the intelligence and true nature of the horse. The place is a destination farm near the Umpqua Forest and River that slows down visitors and patrons enough to experience the shift. The voice is this podcast. Welcome to today's episode.
See, in 2019 sometime, early 2019
Is when you found it.
is when I found it. I didn't have a diagnosis until...
At one point, I could be mistaken, but at one point, did you tell me that the diagnosis was at stage 4?
No, I might have told you that, the dates are jumbled. I can't do it that way. I might have told you that there was a suspected metastasis that
Okay.
I didn't know about
Okay.
under my armpit
Okay.
in the the lymph node.
And how long ago was that?
That was the same time as the diagnosis of cancer was
But they couldn't confirm that
confirmed.
metastasis.
It showed up on the ultrasound.
It did. Okay.
Because what I wanted from my doctor was something that would qualify me for, insurance, hospice, down the line. And I said, what's the minimal thing I can do that's non-invasive that would allow for me to have that ticket, basically.
You were after a ticket, not
I was after a ticket.
not more information from them, right?
Yeah.
So, how are you today? Like this trip down, you look healthier than I've seen you in a long time, right? The last couple of times you were a little tired. One time you had like some stomach thing going on that you came to see me, but you've always looked healthy and been very strong. I just want to tell this story. I remember you going to cook at the Cobb place as a cook, and I remember you telling me a story that you had gone on a walk, and I've been there, and I've been a cook there, and I've been a student there, and so I know the hill that you were talking about. I know the barefoot hike that Yanto liked to take people on, and I think what you had told me is, there were a lot of younger people there, of course, and that they were surprised that you went on the hike barefoot, if I'm remembering right, and that you were behind, and they were kind of concerned about you. And then eventually they got tired, and you were in the front of the group at the top of the hill. And I love that story because it's so much like you, and it reminds me of the story when I first met you, that you had signed up for my Cobb teaching workshop, and you had taken the bus down, and my husband at the time who was helping out the workshop, one of us needed to go get you at the bus stop, and you called and said, well, I'm here, but don't you guys worry, I've got my knitting. I'll just sit here until you arrive. And the ex-husband looked at me and said, what are you doing? Like, you got some old lady coming that's got her knitting needles? How is she going to be able to help us? Because Cobb is like really hard, laborious work, like moving.
Say that?
And then I remember when you arrived, you told me a story, kind of a shapeshifter story about, well, I was there and they seemed to think that I needed some help with my suitcase. And you were a very young, vibrant, like 60 at the time, maybe 62, and which is almost the age I am now. And I remember you told me, so I just let them. I just hunched over a little bit more and decided that I would just be a little old lady and that they could help me. I just thought that was absolutely hysterical, but it encapsulates who you are, too.
It's a form of generosity, I think, to sometimes be like that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of saying it. And so, like, with the character that you have, it doesn't surprise me how you've managed this hole. It's now a hole in your breast. It looks a bit like an inner tube, and it's open in the middle, and it drains out occasionally, and you look absolutely healthy and vibrant.
Well, something happened, and I'm not sure what it was, about a month ago. And it was, I really don't know what happened. I'll try and describe it for you, but it was a turning point from, all the work with the Hawaiian healer and being really, really immersed in that, and then coming to a point that in my work with her, that almost like a proving point, like I didn't need her to have, weekly or every 2 week sessions with me. I felt like I wanted to test the waters on my own, and because she's so forceful in a way in terms of in her support.
Mm-hmm.
There are other disciplines that I wanted to bring back on the table and work with from my lifelong, investigations of those. So I started doing some of that, including enlarging what was a very strict diet for 10 months. And I don't know if it was just that transition away into testing my own stability independently of her support, or claiming that,
So it's almost like
claiming something that then I started to feel better.
there was a
Stronger.
completion of something.
Something.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That is an amazing story. I remember when you told me that you didn't want any treatment. Of course, my inclination was like, oh, what about this? What about that? What about that? And I knew not to say that to you. I knew not to say that because I know...
You're smarter than some were.
Right. And then when you did choose one thing to commit to, you really committed to it.
Oh, no question. I really
Right.
did.
And then you took it to completion. And now you've been free of that for a little while and felt a shift. I can't wait to hear what happens next. You've really been on this amazing journey with this hole in your breast. I don't even want to call it cancer. We did the video with the horse healing session yesterday.
My weeping pearl.
Your weeping pearl. Yes, it's a beautiful weeping pearl.
Well, I guess I feel kind of excited myself, just like you expressed, without any idea. And I feel a reserve, a cautionary reserve in myself to keep in mind that the use of, linguistically we could talk about this, the power of a word.
Right.
And pain is a good example of this. People get poked by a rock or stung by a nettle or something like that. And they go, ow, this hurt me. I've been stung. Rather than, and those words have power to create all sorts of things. So if you replace the word sting with, and this is what nettle work has taught me. Actually, the plant taught me this. Why do you call that a sting? Why don't you look deeper into it, past that? What's going on? I feel tingling. Could it be my arthritis feels a little better? It lasts for how long? Not very long. It's maybe a little uncomfortable when it first happens, but all those things enlarge the relationship with that plant, where if you say, damn it, that plant stung me.
Right. You're in such a judgment and such a tizzy.
And it did, yeah.
Instead of staying in a mindful state of observation of what's happening with your nerves, what's happening with your skin, what's happening underneath your skin.
Exploring it.
A
true adventuresome spirit, So when you say, God, you're looking so better, I wouldn't even know you have, a weeping pearl stuck on your breast.
Right.
I'm wary of self-programming.
Yes, you've been very cautious about that the whole time.
And at this point, with how I feel right now, I have my antenna up about how to name, to name what's happening to myself,
That-
so that it doesn't take away from the absolutely miraculous journey this is
the
to be on.
experience.
Because if I say, "Oh my God, I'm feeling so much better. I think I'm going to be cured,"
You don't want to say that.
I don't want to say that.
You want to stay away from the judgments. You're staying in observation, which is how we learn, which is what mindfulness is too, is just being and observing and not bringing in conclusion, bringing in judgment. And like your session with Sipsy yesterday, Sipsy's my horse, and then me interviewing you a little bit afterwards, you were very much in observation of what had happened without conclusions. And that's the way I approach horses too. And so I mean that's some commonality there. But I noticed as I was interviewing you that you avoided, or you seemed to avoid, the word cancer. And that's one of the things is like, I need to interview her about this, because it's such an incredible story. It is truly. And you were truly an incredible woman. Thank you for sharing all this, Sarah.
I'm so glad I know you, Ishi, and that you're a part of my heart and soul.
Yes. You too. All right. Well, I think we'll end there.
I think we better.
Okay.